Join us on the program right now, a gentleman who is right in the thick of the investigation into Operation Fast and Furious, Congressman Trey Gowdy, Republican from South Carolina, and a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Congressman, thank you so much, sir, for joining us tonight.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. Good evening.
It's great talking to you again. So yesterday we saw the news, the subpoena issued to Attorney General Eric Holder, and while the subpoena asked for a lot of documents, Representative, it seems as well that the subpoena hones in on certain conversations between certain individuals at certain times. I mean, this is not just a blanket request for documents. It seems like there are some very specific things that the committee wants to learn more about.
Well, what we really want is everything, and you shouldn't have to subpoena the Department of Justice. It should be sufficient to ask for it, but apparently in some instances it's not. So we have to resort to legal process, which is a subpoena. And yes, the best investigators, the best prosecutors, if you will, already know the answers to the questions before they ask them. And there are other sources of information beyond the documents that the Department of Justice provides, thank goodness, because most of their documents are so heavily redacted that it looks like a black sheet of paper. So we know certain things took place and certain conversations took place, and we want to see if they were memorialized in the form of a memo or, in some instances, memos on memos. And, again, it's two tracks. Fundamentally, we're interested in this ill-conceived, ill-executed investigation that was dubbed Fast and Furious. That's track one. Track two is you have to have confidence in the Department of Justice, and you have to have confidence in the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the United States. And when you give what is, in my judgment, a demonstrably false response to a pretty unambiguous question in a committee hearing, then you open yourself up for people wanting some verification. You said that you just learned of this operation called Fast and Furious a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's no way that that's accurate. The president in March told Univision that Eric Holder did not authorize the operation. Well, that's March juxtaposed with May, so immediately that's more than a few weeks. And how the president knows that Attorney General Holder did not authorize it is another question that we would like the answer to. Apparently there were conversations, or else he would not have known that the Attorney General didn't authorize it.
Yeah.
So,
well, you know, and it's interesting. I mean, we've been going back and kind of revisiting some of the statements that have been made by the president, by the Attorney General, and a really interesting statement made by former Deputy Attorney General David Ogden, who was also the subject of the subpoena yesterday. Back in March of 2009 at a Justice Department briefing, then Deputy Attorney General Ogden said, the president has directed the Attorney General and I to basically, rethink and go big on our border enforcement efforts. And one of the things that he talked about, he said a program that's going to bring in ATF agents from around the country into the southwest border to provide greater interdiction efforts. I mean, in everything but name, it seemed, Representative, he was describing Operation Fast and Furious.
It could have been, and oh, don't we wish that they had actually done some interdiction as opposed to letting guns walk.
Yeah.
You and I might not be having this conversation if it had been done in a using traditional investigatory techniques. This was not. And, I was having a conversation with Jason Chaffetz, who is a wonderful congressman from Utah, and is on Judiciary and Oversight with me. Jim Jordan was there as well. He's a wonderful congressman from Ohio. This never would have worked from a prosecutorial or investigative standpoint, even if it had taken place exactly as they dreamt it up. You're still not going to have any prosecutions of Mexican drug lords under this ill-conceived investigation. So what I want to know, and what Jason Chaffetz and I are going to ask the first opportunity we have, let's lay aside temporarily the fact that it was botched in its implementation, that's what their defense is.
Right.
That we didn't know when things started going south. Okay. Tell us when you knew about it, period, because that's the only direction it possibly could have gone. There's no way it could have worked. So who in a position of leadership would have stood up and said, you know what, I don't think letting guns get out of our sight, custody, control, dominion is a good idea?
Absolutely. This is something that has bothered me from the get-go, is that as they explain, how this was supposed to work, as you say, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't sound like anything that would ever have actually been able to result in the arrest and detention and prosecution and conviction of these drug cartel leaders. And so I guess my question would be very similar to yours. Where was the discussion about this? At some point, who was told, all right, this is how this operation is going to play out? And as you say, why didn't that person say, guys, we've got a problem here?
Well, you know that wiretaps were involved.
Yeah.
You know that it was an OCDEF case. So there are immediately layers of Department of Justice approval that are required. I suspect what's going to happen is the Department of Justice is going to want to blame the United States Attorney's Office in Arizona. And to be sure, they deserve some blame. But this was a broader investigation, a broader prosecutorial operation, which required Department of Justice input and, in some instances, approval. And we want to know, and forgive us if we don't immediately take your word for it, we want to know through documents who knew what when. Because, again, they're two separate issues. Was it disastrously implemented? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But your question, my question is, even if it had gone off swimmingly, it was never going to work. And who thought it would? I asked ATF agents that came before either judiciary or oversight, walk me through how this was going to result in successful prosecutions. And they keep returning to the same phrase. Our intent was to disrupt, dismember, and destruct Mexican drug cartels. Well, how are you going to do that? Because you never mentioned it to Mexican law enforcement. You didn't even mention it to your own ATF colleagues in Mexico City.
Right.
You're going to let guns go into a sovereign country like Mexico, violative of their gun laws, and then you're going to go ask for their help in extraditing them? It was never going to work. And somebody at DOJ should have known that. And I think everyone knows Eric Holder knew of Fast and Furious way before a few weeks before May, which is what he testified.
Representative, let me ask you something, because we've heard increasing calls that a special prosecutor is needed on this case, and even in fact in the subpoena that was issued yesterday. There's discussion of a conversation between, I believe, Deputy Attorney General Lanny Brewer and then at that time, the U.S. ambassador to Mexico, which would bring in the State Department into this. Is this something that the House Oversight and Government Affairs Committee is prepared to do to expand the investigation beyond DOJ? Is that something that would be best left for a special prosecutor, or is that something that a decision has not yet been made on?
Well, I don't think a decision has been made on it, and it certainly will be made at a level significantly higher than a freshman congressman from South Carolina, which is good, because Lamar Smith and Darrell Issa are fantastic at what they do, and Senator Grassley from Iowa has done yeoman's work on this as well. And in the interest of full disclosure, I was a federal prosecutor, and I have a bias, interestingly enough, towards the Department of Justice. So the fact that, if anyone suggests, well, this is just some guy from South Carolina who doesn't like lawyers, I happen to be one, that doesn't like federal prosecutors, some of my closest friends are federal prosecutors, it actually breaks my heart that the Department of Justice is under this cloud. For 6 years, I worked with ATF. I take no delight in seeing ATF, their name, impacted by something like this. So I'm torn between wanting a special prosecutor who can use the tools of the grand jury, a career person who doesn't answer to Eric Holder but has prosecutorial tools at his or her disposal that a committee of Congress would not, on the one hand. Secondarily, though, if we were to get a special counsel, then the Department of Justice would quit responding to any of our subpoenas, and they would do what they're trying to do now with the Inspector General is say, well, we can't cooperate with your investigation because there's another one going on. We don't want to give them that out either. I think what Chairman Issa and Chairman Smith are going to continue to do is send subpoenas for documents, which is what they have done, and we will go through those documents, and we may have additional requests, despite the fact that Attorney General Holder seems to believe he's complied with his last subpoena. Someone else will be the judge of that and not him. And at some point, the higher-ups in the Department of Justice, including the Attorney General himself, are going to have another opportunity, in fact, perhaps a formal invitation, to come back to the committees of jurisdiction. It could theoretically be a joint session of oversight and judiciary. Lots of us are on both committees, so you could have a joint session, and it's going to be under oath. So let me just say this again. Any notion that this is calculated personally towards Eric Holder, anyone who's watched me question him when he was there in May can't possibly reach that conclusion. I could not have been more respectful. I happen to like prosecutors, but what I like more than anything else is your listeners and the American people having confidence in the Department of Justice and federal law enforcement, and they're not going to get that. They're not going to have that until we get answers to our questions. So I'm not going to let up. Chairman Issa and Chairman Smith are not either.
Let me ask you a question here, Representative, from one of our listeners, Brian, who wrote in from Woodinville, Washington, quoting President Obama at a news conference today tied to the visit of the South Korean president. He was referring to the terror plot that was thwarted that allegedly involved Iran. And he said, the president said, quote, "We believe that even if at the highest levels there was not detailed operational knowledge, there has to be accountability with respect to anybody in the Iranian government engaging in this kind of activity." Brian says it's ironic that this administration would say this to another country but are exempt from their own advice with regard to Fast and Furious.
Ironic is one word. Disingenuous would be another. I want the investigation to be unencumbered. I would like the Department of Justice to be just as interested in getting answers to there have been lives lost. Let us not lose that point for 1 second. Yeah. There have been lives lost to guns that were part of this operation. And it does not matter to me, in the grand scheme of things, whether those lives were on one side of the border or on the other. There are lives lost because of a botched, ill-conceived, ill-executed investigation. And the president can blame what he wants. Attorney General Holder can say, what we really need is a broader conversation about United States gun laws. Look, 924C is a federal gun law. The first one is 5 years. The ones after that are 20 years. If you had done this the right way, and you had done this using traditional investigatory techniques, you could have put Mexican drug cartel leaders in jail for the rest of their life, and not this crazy 10-year maximum lying and buying case, which is what they were doing.
Right.
The tools are already there, and for this to become a subterfuge for a larger conversation about the need for more federal gun laws, how about we just enforce the ones we have and see how that turns out?
Congressman, listen, I can't thank you enough, sir, for coming on the program. It's always a real pleasure getting a chance to talk with you, and hope we can do it again soon.
The pleasure is mine. I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you. You too, sir. Representative Trey Gowdy, Republican from South Carolina, joining us here tonight on Cam and Company.